Internet, hello! Man, we got a treat for you today. It's Mike and Andy here, and
hello.
And we've got a guest podcaster, a fellow podcaster. We're guests on his show. He's a guest on our show, and it's really kind of a fun thing that we're going to do because Mark is from SoCal. He is a punk rocker. He was involved and still is in two of the most influential punk bands. Is that Christian punk bands? Would you say that's an accurate statement?
Mark is kind of known as kind of the godfather of like the Christian punk hardcore music scene.
Yes,
it's kind of started in the mid to late '80s.
Right.
So he was in the band Crucified, and then Stavesacre, which is extremely well known and a large band. Yeah.
So Mark was on another podcast that. It's called Pastor with No Answers.
Correct.
And he was invited into a discussion with a podcaster named Godless,
right,
who has his own podcast called Metal Sucks.
Right.
And so they have this conversation that is podcasted over two parts on the Pastor with No Answers podcast.
Right.
Am I getting this right?
Yep, you got it.
And then Mark, I guess Mark knew of us and knew me from a church called Rock Harbor years ago. And so he reached out and said, hey, could he felt like it was a total catastrophe on his end. And so he reached out and said, hey, could we have a conversation about this other conversation that I had? And so we have listened to that Pastor with No Answers podcast a couple of times. And then he's going to join us today. And we're just going to talk about that conversation. So Andy, can you put the links to it on if you want to listen to this? The first part is kind of mellow and it's really funny, and then the second part things get a little tense,
right?
And that's where Mark, even you'll hear him talk today about he felt like he could have done some things differently, and the point isn't to rehab this conversation with Godless or to bash atheists or whatever, because I know some of you are out there listening, which I just totally love. But it's to talk more about how do we have conversations like this,
right?
And to try to keep Mark from jumping off a ledge.
Yeah, which is near doing after this thing.
Mark is just one of the greatest guys. He is so fun.
Yeah, and
he loves Jesus very much and wants to really represent him well. So this is a fun conversation we've had. Please, he has a podcast called Never Was. Pastors with No Answers is the podcast that he did with this guy named Godless, who has a podcast, and it's on our podcast. So it's like this intermingling of
it's like a podcast about other podcasts, or something that happened in other podcasts.
So anyway, this is a fun conversation. Hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you for responding to my email. I mean, when I sent it to you, I honestly didn't know if it was going to go into a large file of multiple questions. So stoked that I actually heard back and that we have a chance to talk. I mean, ultimately, this is about a nightmare that I had in real life.
But we've all had them.
I found myself in a debate, and I knew it was a debate, but I don't think I really knew it was a debate.
Right.
And I certainly didn't think much about it. I think partially the problem, and this is definitely something that I wanted to talk about in this conversation, is this tendency of people raised in the church in America. And I only say that because I wasn't raised in the church anywhere else.
Right.
People raised in the church in America to see debates as this opportunity for our own pride, to have the satisfaction of being victorious, to display my power and my valor and my intellect. And the truth is,
you were 0 for 4.
I am not that guy. I'm much better. I'm much better at making sure that my dog doesn't go to the bathroom in the house.
That's important.
Like that. So, part of my issue, I think, is just even entering into a situation like that, sort of somewhat blind, partially blinded by my own expectations. But also, I just really wasn't ready for a debate. I was ready for a conversation.
Right.
But, I should have known better, really.
Yeah, but here's, when you reached out, the thing that was so compelling, bro, was the idea that we wanted to have a conversation about the conversation, because I think we've all been in situations, maybe not as public, where we walk away from that conversation and just go, dang it. Yeah. I should have said this. I could have said that. I didn't know what I was getting into. And so I think it's really cool to be able to kind of go back and revisit that conversation, because it's for me, it's not so much about the individual you were having a conversation with. It's more about when we find ourselves in those places, what are the kinds of ways we want to make Jesus beautiful in the way we respond, right? Even when we're in over our head, or we're unprepared, or whatever it is. So I just thought it was so cool that you were willing to kind of revisit it, because it was fascinating for me to spend. I've listened to him twice. And again yesterday, and just wrote a bunch of notes. I just thought there were many great parts to it, and I didn't think it was nearly as horrifying as you thought, but I see why you felt that way.
Yeah. Well, at certain points, it starts to feel like everything. I mean, I'm not kidding. I get tunnel vision so bad. I get it in everyday life and in confrontations. I get it in situations like this. I'm much. In all honesty, I feel much more comfortable just with an exchange of emails,
Yes.
I think that's what we've all grown accustomed to that. We can say whatever we want without pushback in the moment, and we think that's the most clear way to get a point across.
And truthfully, I'm not afraid of the response of somebody as much as I'm afraid of misstating my own position, or even just saying something stupid and hurting somebody's feelings, or I don't know, putting on airs. There's no room for it. There's nothing is served by that. So I don't want to do that.
Yep.
And I think it's important. You guys have mentioned it in our talks leading up to this, and I'm definitely wanting to say it now. Like, this is not a chance to go back and really get godless with the zinger, or there's again pointless. There's no reason for that, and I really just want to explore the conversation and have you put words in my mouth to make me sound smarter.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to quote from C.S. Lewis, who evidently is a complete idiot, but at least he sounds good. As you went back, I love the idea that anytime it's an official debate, we're more concerned with winning and looking good than we are with actually exploring where the other one's coming from. So I love that, as opposed to conversation where it's much less about me versus somebody else. So that's a huge thing. But when you were going back and listening to it, what were some of the things that caused you to feel the way that you did coming out of it?
I think the thing that sticks in my head all the time is my position on the authority of God has always been looked at as sort of cold and calloused. And I don't see it that way, but I know other people do. And I want to communicate that better. And I feel that I didn't communicate that very well in our conversation. I mean, I still maintain, even going back and listening to it, I still maintain that the only logical way of looking at morality is that there is a final authority on morality. And I'm sorry to have to do this, but that is definitely something I learned from C.S. Lewis.
Right.
So as you can imagine, from step one of a debate I wasn't truly prepared for, to have one of my biggest sources of explanation just shot down as a fool
instantly.
It was a little distracting, and again, that's a debate tactic that I'm not familiar with, I think.
Sure.
Which is fine. It's, truth is truth, so it shouldn't matter. And I believe that that's true. I cannot accept a universal morality, and especially not one that's described as having empathy for other people, when we're not universal. We're not universal people. We're speaking from the perspective of Americans in a safe place with running water and food to eat. You know what I mean? It's just, to me, that's an incomplete picture. But
Well,
I
it's
feel like
not only incomplete, but it felt inconsistent in the following respect. There's no evolutionary advantage to empathy. If you take Imago Dei, the image of godness, out of human dignity, then there's utterly no consistent, for me, basis for the treatment of other human beings that are weaker. There's no absolute sort of authority to decry racism or sexism, or to say the disabled should have a place at the table. And so, I don't, the idea of, as you were kind of putting words to the idea that there is this bedrock thing, I don't think, I was listening to that going, yeah, I mean, how C.S. Lewis has this great line, how can you tell a crooked line unless you have a straight one?
Right.
And so how as somebody who says that all morality is community-based, how can you then use your community-based morality to critique another community's morality, right? There's just there's
Sure.
absolutely no. And so I think you were onto something there. What part did you feel like was cold? The slavery bit?
Well, more, going back and listening, there was this whole long passage, which I'm sure I'll drop in here. Going back and listening to it, there was a part of the discussion regarding, holding down your child and giving your child a shot.
Right.
And maybe, trying to explain to your child this is good for you.
Right.
And to where Godless made a great comment. Are you equating that to the death of a child and God saying, hey, this was meant for your good, or the suffering of any person as your God saying, hey, this is a bigger picture type of situation? That to me, my response to that could be seen as somewhat cold, just to like, hey, if this is the divine will of the definer of righteousness and evil and the definer of goodness and love, then yes.
Yeah.
I know that's seen by a lot of people as a cop-out, but I can't see it any other way. Give me another way of seeing it.
No, here's what's funny. This is as old as Greek philosophy. Is if the gods, as they would say, or we would say God, if God is defined and held to account by something called the good, then the good is greater than God, and God, it boundaries God. In other words, it exists apart from God, whatever this good is. Or is it, and this is what you were kind of hinting at, this sort of divine fiat. If God says it, then by definition, it's good. Right. Even if it offends whatever moral sensibilities we may be carrying in American culture in 2016.
That is 100% where I'm at.
Yes,
that's where my mind is.
It's fascinating because this has been a discussion about the divine's relationship to the good for literally thousands of years. And so you guys, when I was listening to it, I'm like, oh yeah. And so that's, if I were in a similar situation, I always answer the problem of evil a bit differently. And I don't know where you are, like on whole predestination, is everything God's will? I'm very much in favor of libertarian free will, which means that there are other wills that are done on earth and in heaven other than God's. And obviously it's a hugely controversial theological position, but it allows me to say, listen, what you said when you said about the parent holding the child down is that it is possible to have good intentions to be compatible with a subject not picking up on those good intentions, but instead picking up on the action at the moment that hurts.
Right.
Right? So that's compatible, and that's a legitimate point. Then the extrapolation, which is what Godless called you on, was, okay, can you extrapolate that to the Holocaust? Can you extrapolate that to the genocide in Rwanda? Can you say then that there's some greater good that this is going to serve, and that's why God did it? And so for me, God doesn't cause any of those things, but God uses them. So the way we say it, and I don't know if this would have helped or even you would agree with it, is that God is good, evil is evil, And God's commitment is to sovereignly bring good out of evil. So the place I would change maybe the scenario a little bit would be from, yes, as a parent, I'm holding my kid down and my intentions are loving and good and kind, even though my kid doesn't receive them as such. You're saying, hey, 10 years from now, they'll actually see that what I was doing was good and in their best interest. No such picture exists unless you're going to play the eternity card, that someday, in light of eternity, we'll see how this whole thing fit together. And that to people, yes, does feel cold. But it's a very tenable theological and philosophical position, right? And some of the biblical writers say, we're the clay, he's the potter, shut your yap, right? I mean, that's
where I'm at, man.
Who are we? But I also think the Bible opens up the possibility that evil is something that God doesn't intend ever, but that God permits in the name of freedom, which he permits in the name of love. And that his commitment isn't to sovereignly do something bad to people in order to bring about a good, but rather he will bring about a good when bad things do happen. So I for instance, have a little boy with Down syndrome. And I had, when he was first diagnosed in utero, I had these huge conversations with a friend of mine who was saying, isn't it amazing that God would give you a child with Down syndrome?
Right.
Think about all he's going to teach you. And I was going, really? So your picture of God is that he's given me a child with Down syndrome to teach me something. And that seems a bit like center of the universe, narcissistic to me.
Super morbid, yeah.
So, but I was like, well, couldn't it be we live in a fallen world where birth defects happen or genetic abnormalities happen, and it's not God up there causing it or picking and choosing, but rather it's God committing to bring good out of whatever it is that we would think to be evil. So I don't know if that helps, reframes or anything.
No, it does. I think what would come back in that conversation, and which came back in the debate that we had, was Godless's point or counterpoint better, would be, if this God is so good, why would he even allow any of that to happen in the first place? Why wouldn't he come in and save the day?
But that's when your parent-child example takes off. Because what's the greatest thing that God's interested in? He's interested in cooperative participants. That's why he made us from the very beginning of the scriptures. We were not autonomons. We were not robots.
I know where you're going.
Dang it. We were not robots. We were not puppets.
Right.
And in the universe that God chose to actualize, love is the greatest value. And love has to exist with freedom. Freedom is a prerequisite of love, right?
Okay.
Love has to be freely chosen. It can never be compelled. It's never, because then it's never love. I mean, in the way that God created the relational universe to reflect his own inner relationality in his Trinitarian self, God actualized the universe where love is the greatest value. Love requires freedom. Freedom then requires choice. So yes, God could, as an act of brute power, have stopped Hitler, have stopped me from sinning all the countless times I've hurt other people. He could absolutely stop murders. And who's to say he doesn't? I mean, I don't know. I believe that prayer actually affects the things that go on. And so I believe there are things that God would do, but doesn't, because his people have not cried out to him. And of course that would feed Godless's point of, well, I mean, how dumb is that?
Right.
But see, for me, the thing that I picked up on was the whole vision that many people have of what a relationship with Jesus is like and what it's for wasn't, he had this, and it's not specific to him. This is just true all over the place, even in the church. He had something that it felt very contractual. It's like, if God is like this, then God should do this.
Right.
And he spells that out, and you kept calling him on it. Dude, that's just you. You're just importing your own morality onto this whole conversation, which is a fair critique.
Right. It does happen all the time. That's how people try to figure stuff out.
Yep. But, oh, dang it. I lost my point. Andy, thank you.
Sorry.
Autonomon.
Oh, you were talking about contractual setup.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like marriage.
We can edit that so that you sound super eloquent.
No, because then people would know it's edited. Right? My phone, my wife called in our last podcast, and so we had to pick it up. So it's anyway. All that is to say, it felt very much like, and again, I'm sure he would disagree with even this characterization, but I think this characterization represents a lot of the way people approach this. That this thing is a contract, and the contract is me doing religious things and God blessing and taking care of me. Mm-hmm. And the biblical picture of faith is much more rugged. It involves much more mystery and paradox and tension. It's much more relational. It's covenantal, obviously. And it's not an all or nothing thing. In other words, listen, if you disagree with, and you said this, I think in part 1, you said, listen, my faith doesn't hinge on how old the earth is or Noah and the ark, for crying out loud, right? The whole thing rests on who Jesus is. And if Jesus is what God does in response to suffering, then that's the best answer of suffering you're ever going to get. Right? That he weeps, that he absorbs evil, takes it in upon himself, that he, even knowing the end of the story, he laments over Lazarus. I mean, it's the most beautiful picture of God. It's the opposite of cold. Yeah. But you have Jesus saying the whole time, listen, I'm just doing what the Father does, right? That's all I'm doing. Nothing's original here. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so one of the things that maybe in that conversation I would have began to sort of redirect towards is what did Jesus do in response to the evil that he was encountering? And what did that look like? And what does that say about what God's like? Because we have to move from our abstract, what the Bible forces us to do is to move from abstract definitions of God to this person that says, here's what God looks like with clothes on. Here's what God looks like with skin on, right? This Jesus character. And he's the center of the whole thing. So it doesn't matter what you think about evolution or science or whatever else. Those are all battles we can have somewhere down the road. To me, the whole thing is, look at, if this is what God's like, this is the best news we've ever had.
Okay.
So I feel like you were absolutely right in holding the consistent position that if God is God, God has every right to tell me what's right and what's wrong. That's true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is things are they're just inevitably going to go back to the individual whom you're speaking to is going to ask, yeah, but why? But why? Why is this happening? And for me, I think one thing that I really missed there was the opportunity to continue that question. You know, we could say all these things, and God, you know, if he's the definer of right and wrong, and all those types of things are true, and then it can still come back. A person could still respond with, yeah, but if that doesn't change the fact that I'm hurting, or that I am in pain, and that my heart is broken, you know? And I think that's a valid question. And it's something that we as Christian people need to not only acknowledge, but try and answer. And that's where my coldness, I think, comes in, is that sometimes I just don't answer it, because to me, it's such a much larger question, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you could sit there and be like, okay, well, yeah, that's all great and everything, but this still hurts, and it's still no fun to be a slave, and et cetera, et cetera. To which what an aggressive debater, if I was an aggressive debater, I would say, okay, cool. So what are you doing about it? And why is it that you get to live in a country where we can have this conversation out in the open, and no one will come in and set you on fire?
And I think, you know, one of the things, if I can use a football analogy.
Oh, you can.
Oh, baby. Oh, and I will.
That's where I go make a sandwich.
I know. Andy's a hockey guy.
Fine.
So is that you were playing a lot of defense and no offense. And
yeah,
so
I'm just not that guy, man.
I know. No. I know. It's not. Listen, this is nothing. This is nothing about you interacting with him as individuals. This is more. If I were in that conversation with you, I'd have just been going, okay, so let's play suffering out on your worldview. Right. There is no hope. There is no meaning. There is no significance. There is no greater good. It just sucks to be you. That's it. You hit the unlucky lottery. It sucks to be you, and that's all we can say. That's all we can say. So
yeah, see, that to me is like almost, it bums me out. That's really the only way that it goes in my head, you know. Yes. Sucks to be you. Magic didn't work out for you.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
And so then the other thing, now again, I'm getting into the debatey part. I mean, if we're having a beer, it's a different conversation, because then it's like, dude, tell me about how the church disappointed you. Tell me about how God let you down, because he's let me down too. Right? That if certainty is what we're after with Jesus, we'll never have it. And if not ever hurting is what we're after with Jesus, then we'll never have it. See, that's the contractual idea of faith that I think was kind of at root of some of the questions that were sitting behind this. It's like we're talking about two different things. Mm-hmm. The covenantal faith in Jesus has nothing to do with whether or not bad things happen to you. It has to do with this greater work that God's doing because of its fallenness to put creation back together. Now, all kinds of questions with that, but my point is, listen, if the goal of biblical faith is to get out of pain, man, we're in trouble. That's not biblical faith at all, unless you're, some prosperity person. But for me,
wait a minute. You're telling me that I'm not going to be rich?
More than you are? No. I know it's shocking. I know, bro. I'm with you. I've sent my seed money into TBN so many times.
I made my vows, dude. Don't you dare discredit my vows. Okay, I'm sorry. I completely derailed that.
No, this is so good, Mark. The other thing that, and this is a Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, sort of
morons.
Sort of point is, listen, why are you protesting so much? Why isn't your protest evidence of the fact that you know it shouldn't be this way? Isn't your broken heart evidence of the fact that you know that relationships shouldn't be this way? Huh. Isn't all the energy you're spending in antagonism? See, I find a lot of atheists to be incredibly spiritual people because of how much they think about the God they don't believe in, and how much they protest against the God they don't think is real. And I find that incredibly interesting when I'm around people like that, because they spend more time thinking about it than a lot of religious people do.
Yeah, that's true.
And so to me, I'm hearing all of this and I'm going, where's that coming from? I mean, to me, that is all evidence of the fact that we know we were made for something bigger. And he's protesting. At least it sounded like it. And again, nothing against him at all. I thought it was beautiful, some of the things he was saying. But it's protesting the God that should be there and wasn't. Right. The faith that should have sustained me and didn't. And the one option he's not considering, at least I didn't hear considered, was that what the conception of faith he'd bought into wasn't the right one from the very beginning. And that one was bound to disappoint him, and that conception of God was bound to be hurtful to him, because whatever it was he was presented with wasn't the real, true, good, and beautiful gospel of Jesus to begin with. Yeah. So, and again, you couldn't get into any of that. And I'm not saying you should have said any of this. I'm just commenting as I'm hearing you comment on that conversation, going, man, I think that as our listeners go back and listen to it, we'll all find ourselves there, man. Just in a conversation, it's like, dude, what in the world?
Well, okay, here, let me sort of change things up just a little bit, and
I'm shocked.
Me, that's, but it's a continuance of what you just said. As far as like the gospel that he heard wasn't the right one from the beginning.
Yes, okay?
A point was made during the debate about the New Testament versus the Old Testament, and why is, if God is this definer of good and evil, or a definer of righteousness,
this was huge.
How can he change? Did he change? Because why is the New Testament so different from the Old Testament? And then, of course, the age-old slavery, which I had to go back and listen to, and I have to say this because I wasn't sure. I was so frustrated during this conversation that I would forget things that I actually said or tried to say.
Yeah.
I did try to make the point of bondservants versus slaves. And I've done some research on it, and just to know the problem that many of us get into, and this is really more about getting yourself stuck in a debate type of situation, is a confidence in the things that you believe and a confidence in what you've learned and making sure that you remember it. I'm not a fan of, I am an apologetics A+ student. I have all these terms. I think we saw during that conversation that those terms do not help.
Right.
And really, the silver bullet Christian apologetics thing has always been sort of horseshit for me. I don't see it as playing out in the real world practically. I think of the scene in Napoleon Dynamite when, Rex Kwon Do is trying to show how to
I'm in.
you attack this way. The arm is out perfectly straight. The knife is coming down. Those types of defenses are pointless. But I think he was, his point was, why is this God so different? You're saying he's this loving God and that he doesn't change. Why is he so different in the New Testament as he is from the Old Testament? And then there's this sort of blanket. He encourages slavery.
Right.
And he teaches people to rape and pillage, et cetera, et cetera. So,
right.
When we talked earlier about, when you walk away from a conversation, why didn't I say that?
Yes. Always.
This is one of those big ones where I tried to say, again, I sort of retreated and said, hey man, if this is the will of God, I have to simply accept it. I think that's an incomplete answer on my part. And definitely not only did I fail in the debate, but I think I failed him in giving a good explanation and a good defense of the truth. I wasn't trying, I wasn't attempting hard enough to go for an opportunity there as opposed to just explaining something away. Does that make sense?
It does, but could I push back just a little bit on the idea that you failed? Well, and only because, let's play this out 3 or 4 different ways. Was there anything you could have said that would have satisfied him?
I just needed better zingers, man. Zingers.
Yep. See, I don't think so. I think for a lot of, and I'm not saying this about him, I don't know him at all. But I think a lot of people have settled on that issue, and no matter what kind of answer you give, it's never going to meet the criteria. I mean, he even said that a couple of times. God knows what would make me believe. I don't even know what would make me believe. So one idea is that success means I can answer every question to their satisfaction. That's just not true. You'll never be able to do that. Even if you gave the best answer you could give, Mark, I don't know that he would have said, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. Second thing is in the environment. So the debate environment, nobody's going to change their mind in that public forum. And to me, the idea that success there would have meant you being able to have a good comeback, I just go, I don't know, man. One of the things I liked about what you did is that you were trying to maintain the integrity of your convictions alongside of respecting him and not doing the Christian judgment thing. Mm-hmm. And if those are two values you're carrying in, it's tough to really go on attack mode like you could have. And so for me, if somebody says, well, what about the difference in the testaments? I always say, okay, well, give me an example. Now he would have had one. I find it interesting that a lot of people don't. People will say, hey, the Bible's full of contradictions. I'm like, great, let's hear one.
Right.
And that's just something they heard somewhere. And that's just a cheap little, but what were you going to say something, Andy?
Well, I was going to say, I think on the debate, it was kind of like, not so much as contradiction, but it seemed morally opposing. It's like you have God leading Israel and wiping out nations for Israel's sake to take over a land. Right. And then you have Jesus on the other side saying, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's like he's, Jesus is advocating for like, don't murder. In fact, like love those who would.
Right.
And so I think that to me is a very clear picture of like, okay, that seems opposing.
Yeah.
So like and I think it's like, how do we reconcile that?
Yes.
And it's like, because we have a lot of folks out there who hold Old Testament ideas to future truth and current truth, which seems to oppose what Jesus said.
Right.
So how do we reconcile those things?
Also, while reconciling it, I definitely want Mike to answer in that.
Let me give you the right zinger.
But while reconciling that, I also think it's important to stay away from the usual Christian apologetics methods. I've heard this response to that question so many times. Well, do you know what those people were doing?
Yeah.
You know
how evil they were?
The Moloch and all of that stuff. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Do we know that that's really the way every single person in Canaan was? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think we know that. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there.
I like it.
For anyone who's afraid that's about to come up.
That was Mike's direction.
Thanks for making me look smart by not using my fastball there. No, I mean, first of all, that's a hugely important question. And so I think the scriptures itself give clues to the resolution of it. And so here are clues. I don't know. It's always tough when, by the standards of morality, 3,000 or 4,000 years later, with a culture 3,000 or 4,000 years removed, with huge differences in language and societal structure and all of those sorts of things, it's tough to make really accurate moral judgments, because what the scriptures seem to teach is all the pictures of God that we get are true, but they're incomplete, and that the only full one we get is in Jesus. And so the scriptures itself say, listen, God spoke many times in many ways, but only Jesus is the exact representation of his being, the true essence of his like inner self. Okay. So to me, the revelation of Jesus trumps any other revelation, because that's the complete one. The other ones were true but incomplete. So is God unbelievably holy? Yes. So you get the image of the poor guy who puts his hand out to steady the Ark of the Covenant, and he gets zapped. And David's pissed and he's bummed and he's like, come on. And so he doesn't even bring the Ark back to Jerusalem. He's just like, really? Really, God? I'm just trying to honor you here. So is that picture of God true? Yes. He's unbelievably holy. In him there is no darkness, blah, blah, blah. And that's not the only true picture. The only full picture we get is in Jesus. And so for me, I don't start with Old Testament God. I start with Jesus and then work backwards. Mm-hmm. So that's hugely important to me. My faith doesn't start in the Old Testament. My faith starts with Jesus and the New Testament writings about him, and then I go into the Old Testament. Make sense?
Yeah, I guess I would ask, just for the sake of maintaining this debate kind of forum.
Do it, Mark.
What verse would you point to say, there's this, by this authority, I say that Jesus is the final full picture of God? What verse would you say gives you that authority to say that?
Beautiful.
You know what I mean?
Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, here we go. Hebrews 1, 1 through 3. Colossians 1, 15 and following. Colossians 2, 9 and following. Sucker. John 14, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Luke 10, where Jesus says, listen, the only one that reveals the Father is the Son who knows him.
Oh, yeah.
Suck on that, godless list. So,
but he doesn't read the Bible, so it just doesn't matter.
So, yeah, exactly. So it's, for me, I think it's so unbelievably clear that what Jesus is doing is revealing the heart of the Father in ways the Father has never been revealed before. And one of the ways he does that is by calling God his Father. Mm-hmm. And so Israel was considered God's son, and they used father language, but not like Jesus did. Israel was so if you look at the biblical story at like the highest level, there were three God's sons in the scriptures. One was Adam, and the first part of Genesis is about his failure. The second is Israel, and that was about their collective failure to be God's son. And then you have Jesus. And so the way God is interacting with Adam with Israel and then with Jesus, it's all very revealing, and there's remarkable consistency across all of that. So there's much more mercy in the Old Testament than people give God credit for, and there's much more harsh in the New Testament than people give the New Testament credit for. I mean, you have Ananias and Sapphira who lie about giving, and they just fall over dead in the early church. Right? You've got Jesus saying things to the most esteemed religious leaders. So that'd be like us rebuking Billy Graham and Mother Teresa, right? When he's rebuking the Pharisees and calling them children of snakes and whitewashed tombs. I mean, they're so insulting. And so, or Jesus, using a whip to clear up the temple. You've got, it's a much more consistent picture, I think, than what people realize. So the first thing I'd say, and so I got 3 answers for you. First thing I'd say is, listen, the image of Jesus is the full revelation of the Father. All the other images are true but incomplete. And if there's ever an inconsistency between the image of God we see in Jesus crucified and other images of God, that's one of the ways I resolve it. It's just to say, listen, the final and fullest image of God that we've received is in this person, Jesus. And Jesus himself says that, as well as the New Testament writers. Second thing I say is, and you were going there in the debate, and this is where we got onto the slavery thing, but God was always ahead of his time. In other words, even when God would give instructions, they were super revolutionary for the day. Okay. And so you were starting to say that, and it's a slavery example is one of those. How Israel was to take care of the prisoners of war they would take, the way women were to be treated. I mean, by our egalitarian standards, horrifying, but by the standards of the ancient Near East, hugely revolutionary. In almost every instance, you can say this was an advance on the current practice. And divorce was something you guys brought up as a concession that God would make to human hardness of heart, but his intention was always one man, one woman. And you brought up polygamy as a great example of God allowing our failure for the sake of our freedom, for the sake of our love of God, freely given. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I'm following you. I'm just taking notes, so.
Shut it. Oh, Mark.
Let's watch Mark's Twitter account after this and see how much stuff we put together.
I love you so much, dude. I feel like we need to fly you out, because this is your native land, bro. Out here. This I'm Florida homesick. Thing, I mean, that's old people. You're not old.
Homesick. This is God's waiting room. I got here early, and I've read every magazine. It's
beautiful. But we'd have so much fun, dude. So you need to come out. And if you come out, we need to fly you out. That's what we need. We need to collect $300 for a Southwest ticket.
Yeah.
Let's do
that.
I still have a voucher for Delta. I can fly out there on Delta's dime.
Boom. And we can just record podcasts. And
I'm all right with that.
And what kind of beer do you like? I mean, I think we had this conversation, but I forget what you said.
I'm a rum drinker. Beer destroys my stomach. Although if I do have a beer or two, I prefer a very rich, very chocolatey, very espresso-based stout. Nitro only, please. Please don't mess with the nitro-free stouts.
Frothing over here. What time is it?
I want to set a penny on top of the foam.
We're going to edit this out.
Stay there.
Because we did a whole podcast on why Coors Light is the king of beers. So,
oh Lord, oh my God!
So again, the authority of one man's opinion.
It's the similarity in Coors Light's packaging to the Ohio State uniform. That's exactly.
Oh yes!
Oh, finally, someone caught it. Someone finally caught it.
It's a no-brainer, man.
Oh, that is genius. Oh, he's doing the, what are you doing right now? Because I'm yelling.
Turning you down.
Oh my goodness, bro. That was worth the price of admission, and that's our title. Mark notices the similarity between the Coors Light can and the Ohio State University uniform. I love it. All right, and then here's the third thing I would say, always in that context, is it's ultimately a false dichotomy, and I've already hinted at this, is that there's more mercy in the Old Testament than we realize, and more judgment in the New than we realize, but it's all the story of grace, whether it's Adam, Abraham, Jacob, Israel. It's always God would make a way for his people or anybody to call upon his name and to come back to him. And that story is universal. And that's the story of covenant. These agreements God would make to put the world right. Now, the counter that Godless made to that way of thinking that I heard in the podcast was, well, then how come he just doesn't do it all at once? Why don't you just start with hey, no polygamy, no whatever, instead of working within the framework of fallen culture? And the answer for me is, well, God's a missionary God. And good missionaries know you don't go in and you don't fight secondary battles. The issue isn't how many people you're sleeping with. The issue isn't your sexual orientation. The issue is your heart, right? And you can address all of the symptoms and never deal with the root. You can address. And what God's after in human history is a people gathered around himself, pulled out of human history, who freely have surrendered their rights to their lives, and to whatever degree they think they have them, to achieve with God his purposes for the renewing of all creation. That's what he's after. He's not after souls in heaven. He's not after sin management. He's not after keeping you healthy and happy. What he's after are cooperative participants in the work of renewal. That's the reason he created. We will be doing the work of renewal forever on a renewed earth. And so for me, all of that, the fact that God actualized that kind of universe requires then that he work with us in the midst of our failures and screw-ups because he's given us freedom. Now, you could say, well, God should have done it differently. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Show me the blueprint.
Right. To which then I would go a little bit on offense and say, okay, well, let's talk about the world you would have actualized. Or let's talk about the worldview you have and why it is that you think that we have freedom and rationality and morality, and we're just human blobs. If we're soulless, if we're mindless and we're just our brains, if we're just our bodies, if this really just all evolved from nothing and will end up in nothing, then what right do you have to have even an opinion on this stuff, right? I mean, if your brain is truly just the result of randomness, well, come on. So at that point, I always just try to go, well, all right, we've brought this conversation to an end. You object to the universe God made. Okay. Right. Let's talk about the universe you think exists, and let's poke holes in that, right? Because that's not fully consistent either. And because it may be intellectually consistent to say, yep, there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no nothing, but nobody lives that way. Nobody lives that way. When you're in pain, you're not sitting there saying, yep, this is for nothing. You're looking for purpose. You're looking for meaning. You're looking for significance. That is just part of who we are. You cannot escape it. Huh. So anyway, these conversations are always better had over Coors Light, and in boxer shorts in a jacuzzi, usually among brothers.
See, Mike doesn't even wear trunks in a jacuzzi.
Wow.
He
just the
goes.
boxers.
Super bummed right now.
Yeah, you should be, because they're very small boxers.
Oh no!
I think.
So,
did you finally find your thong boxers? Wow, man!
I know, dude.
Congratulations.
My Australian friends call them banana hammocks.
Yeah, plum smugglers.
So, the missus really likes this.
I'm sure she does, and I think your mom will approve.
I know my mom just goes, really? Can you try to be professional in any way, shape, or form? One
thing I would just ask, I guess, or not be afraid to observe, is that with all of this morality and all this moral subjective behavior, and do we live like there's a purpose? I still think it all keeps going back to what I was trying to say, and I just don't know that I said it all that well. Partially because when I listen back, it's like I have to hear my voice, and the sound of my voice talking
totally
sucks.
I know. I think you have a great voice.
You listen, and I listen back, and I'm like, what am I? That's not even a word, man. You're just like mumbling a couple syllables. People have had to listen. All I can think is people have had to listen to that whenever they've talked to me for my whole life. Oh, jeez. Oh, God. No wonder I have no friends.
That is not true. When I listen to my voice, it's nasally, and it just sounds like the voice of a fat guy. and I'm hoping that if I lose some weight, my voice will get a little more Eddie Vedder-ish. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
the voice of a skinny guy.
Be much better. I just don't know that I'm ever going to get there. Mine just sounds, I still feel like I sound like that kid who was nicknamed Rainbow as a child. Like I still have this giant head, jacked up teeth, a very strong neck, and just, I mostly just bounce around while I'm talking. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm a bobblehead.
I would have been friends with somebody named Rainbow. I guarantee that. I guarantee. Because I had one friend. His name was Travis in the 7th grade. And we just hung out. We were just friends with each other. We needed no one else. So Rainbow could have joined that party. Absolutely.
I would have.
Now back to the morality thing. What were you trying to say?
What I was trying to say was I still think the question that was never answered by him in particular, and I'm not trying to attack, but it's a question that doesn't ever get answered, really. I mean, I've had this conversation many times regarding universal morality and if it's viable, Yeah. I still maintain that this is one area of offense that Christian people need to seize on like a pit bull, because it's everything. It's all the stuff we're talking about. All the moral questions and moral quandaries that are being presented still fall under this thing of morality. And, if God is a jerk, that's a moral observation that you're making.
Right.
That's a moral judgment that you're making. And so you still have to ask the question, where is the authority of this? Where is this final question of morality? And do you think that that I have a point there? I mean, is that the way to go? I don't know if I'm restating something that's been discussed already, but I feel like it bears specific focus, that moral objectivity and moral relativism, or subjectivity and relativism. I'm sorry to use those words.
Whoa. Look at you, apologetics defender of the faith.
It's just bullshit though, man. I mean, it doesn't work. He brought up the example of the 9/11 and the planes, and to me, that's a great example of what I'm trying to say. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you think could I have stated that better? Because I feel like it's a good point.
I agree that you're a good man and that you have a great voice. Secondly, I think that personally, of course, I think that we make moral judgments all the time without realizing how they're grounded. So he was playing the empathy card, and you just want to say, well, what's that grounded in? Why? Right. Why? If evolutionary psychology is how we're going to understand human emotion and human mind, then what's empathy do for you? There's just not a whole lot. If there's no, to me, intrinsic value in humanness, then why not just use people?
Right.
And a lot of us do, even if we claim kind of an objective sort of moral order. So first of all, are you onto something? To me, yes, absolutely. And of course he would disagree. And the way he was answering was, it seemed to be that morality is community defined. But then, and this is where the 9/11 thing comes into play. Well, according to the community of the hijackers,
right,
that was not only acceptable, it was praiseworthy. It was morally and religiously praiseworthy. And so if you're going to say it's community defined, in what way can you then critique another community?
Right.
And I almost feel we already live in a world like that. Like, it's not like, if we look at it on that higher level of like, if governments are defining how people exist in a space defined by rules and how we're supposed to treat each other, which is then justifiable by laws and ideas, that is a way that a community is trying to establish the best moral good based on its opinion in the collective of others.
Right.
So then, yeah, that's exactly it. Like you have Al-Qaeda and Taliban, they decide, raise a ton of funding. This is what we believe in as the best moral truth that we can go by. We need to wipe out the oppressor in this, and we will validate that. Obviously, we stand against that and we disagree it. Whether God is a part of the conversation or not, just as humans, they had their way, we had our way. How are we supposed to just sit down with them and say, hey, we're going to just disagree on these things. Let's come to some middle ground and universal truths that we should just exist.
And someone like Godless could say, well, then the Christian morality is just another communal expression, right?
Right. Exactly.
Of, in the same way the Muslim reality is, or Jewish reality or whatever. The problem is you have to stand somewhere outside of all of those to make that judgment.
Right.
And so ultimately, and again, here I've just found when I go into this, people just don't care. I mean, at the end of the day, they don't care if their view is, not totally morally or intellectually consistent or whatever. It's just kind of like, no, this is just kind of what I think, and it's not a big deal. I remember I learned this early on with a buddy of mine who, he was an atheist, I was a theist. And we were in college and just had the greatest conversations. And there was one day I said, bro, if I could answer everything, would you buy this? And he's like, no way. He said, no, I want to sleep with my girlfriend. So of course not. I'm not going to, even if you could answer all this stuff. And I realized, oh, okay. Just as in like the point that there are emotional reasons that people follow Jesus in terms of wish fulfillment or guilt complex or whatever, that we would say, that's probably not the best reason to follow Jesus. There are those same reasons for being an atheist, right?
Right.
And so I just think whatever we're going to use, we got to be consistent with it. So if you're going to protest against the morality of God, and here's what's interesting, bro. I'm sure you've noticed this, but the objections today against following Jesus aren't intellectual as much as they are moral. So following Jesus makes you a worse kind of person is the argument, because God, right. There was a book written several years ago. It was called Searching for a Better God. And the assumption the guy was making is, listen, God has been found guilty by our modern sense of morality. God is not egalitarian. He's not democratic. God is not peaceable, according to this narrative. God is judgmental. God is mean. I mean, it's fascinating because you were getting all of that, right? And you're playing the card of saying, well, how can you make those judgments? You have nothing to stand on. And he's saying, well, it's just community-based. So, of course you were onto something, dude. Of course. The issue is, let's say you would have said it great. Would that have mattered?
No.
Nope.
So, so it's like,
I just wish I had said it great, though.
I know, bro. See, even after we finish this podcast, I can't go back and listen to any of them because I will literally just beat myself up with, I should have said this and I could have said that better. I just literally cannot go back and listen because I totally know that feeling and I hate it. So I don't ever go back. Andy goes back to edit them. Bless you, Andy. I don't. And one of the things I love about the podcast format is there's a built-in grace there because it's conversational and it's, so when you guys were getting into this debate, I can see where that was a bit confusing because you thought we're on a podcast. We're not even in the same room together. You don't know who this person is. And you're being put on the spot with some pretty intense questions. So I get that there was a bit of like, oh, this is something totally different.
Oh yeah, dude! I brought a bag of chips and some soda to a knife.
But even if you would have brought knives, see what I want to just keep holding before you, Mark. And again, who am I? Is just the idea that you didn't fail. That you were trying to preserve the dignity of this other person. So you were not doing ad hominems. You weren't attacking him. You were respecting him. And you were trying to uphold the integrity of your positions. And So bro, I just kind of felt like I'm glad you brought chips and a drink, because as you said, I used to be an apologetics guy. That's not, I just don't think that's effective. I think that is really helpful for Christians who believe, they want to know why they believe. Great. But I don't find non-Christians asking any of those questions. Hey, give me the evidence for the resurrection. Hey, show me miracles exist. Nope, they're all this moral stuff that God isn't as moral as they are. And so I think that the fact that the podcast spent so much time kind of exploring that, I think that was a great thing. I think that's really helpful, because that's how those conversations go anymore.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Every person, as we've discussed over and over now, and you walk away, and I should have said this, every person that finds themselves pretty much in that scenario, it started off one way. Like, for instance, bellied up at a bar, having a drink. You're talking about, the game. Then all of a sudden politics are involved. And then suddenly this dude is a moral monster. That's how it always happens. And
so bringing chips and a drink, that's not always a bad thing, man. That's not always a bad thing. But in a real public forum like that, I get it. I get it. And
it may not be a bad thing, but it didn't do anything for my ego. I definitely sprained my ego on that one.
Yes. But you know what, dude? I think there's something beautiful about, and it was really funny because I know you a little bit, and we've talked a couple of times. And so I was, I'm a pretty huge Mark fan. But I just loved the approach you were bringing, especially in the first part of the episode, when you're just kind of there with your chips and your drink, just kind of cheering everything on. And then it flips in part 2, and it's like, oh, this is a knife fight.
Oh shit. What is happening right now?
You hear the tunnel vision sort of click in, and you can hear, it's so great, dude. It's so great. So
it's so not great,
man. It is great.
It was such a bummer, man. I've been in that scenario so many times, and I can just, the picture of me sitting there with chip crumbs all over my shirt and like my mouth open, like, wait a but I thought, we're not going to the movies. Like, it was a bummer.
We got to affirm it, man. Like I've friends that I've talked to, they expect the opposite. They expect getting into conversations with Christians turn into knife fights. They go into it being just like, dude, like this guy said this and said that. Like I couldn't even have a real conversation because all he was saying was these things about how can you believe this and how can you believe that. And it's in my experience, even with other Christians I'm friends with, that's even been my own conversation. I'm like, man, like we all should be bringing chips and a soda to these instead.
Yep. So I just think, hey, and what would be fun, Mark, is let's do another one of these, and let's try to find somebody who would disagree with us, and
right.
and let's have a chips and a drink conversation.
I'm getting my stomach. Hey, well, I'll tell you what. What we can do is we can do that whenever you're ready. I'll probably be a lot quieter. But also, as I was explaining to Andy, there's an episode of mine that will either come out right before or right after this, where I have some political discussion has to be made and statements have to be made. Maybe I may get a call from you after that. I don't know. We'll see.
I like it. So what you're from just our conversation, you're voting for Trump, and so I'm proud of you for sticking to your convictions. And Florida. Well, yeah, I mean, isn't I thought Donald was our savior. So
wow. Man,
I think we'd have a great conversation. I've always wanted to talk to a real live Donald Trump supporter.
You may need to continue searching. I mean, obviously our conversation now is over, but as far as this podcast was concerned, but I will say on the Podcastalypse thing that I mentioned to Andy, there's this thing I do called Podcastalypse with Billy Power and with Mike Lewis. And we're we're all three very similar and also very different kinds of people. And that during that conversation, the discussion came up as to what the real appeal of Donald Trump is.
Oh, that's a great one.
I think you might want to.
Yep. Just
my take was somewhat controversial.
Oh, I love it.
Well, but I live in Florida, land
Oh
of
my
Trump,
goodness, you
so,
do. Oh, bro.
You know.
Yes, you do.
So
Mark,
so listen, I just wanted to say thank you because this was freaking great, dude. I mean, this was so awesome.
Oh.
Yeah, so this was great.
Very
Again,
blessed.
Mark, thanks for reaching out to us. Like, I've heard you on a few of the other shows that I listened to. I was super ecstatic that you reached out. You know, I have a connection to you with my own musical interests and background. Real fast, just for our listeners, if you can just give us a little more about what you're doing, what your podcast is, and how people can find out more about you.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm still a musician. I'm still the singer of Stavesacre. We're doing a new record, but I'm always doing something. And currently, I run a podcast called Never Was, which basically talks about what happens to you after your dreams die. So,
when you don't even have the glory days.
That's not the pitch I give to people because no one's ever super eager to talk about that. But really, I am fascinated by finding out what happens to people after whatever brushes with success they have, you know, musically,
I love it.
As far as actors might be concerned, artists, any kind of art form or thing that requires a little bit of risk, a person putting themselves out there and trying to, you know, quote unquote, make it. And then, you know, what happens after, even if you do make it, what happens after that? You know, we have this kind of Hollywood vision of the way life goes. There is no sunset. No one rides off into it.
Dude.
There's a cliff. There's burning fire. You know,
if you ever want to pastor failure, I can do one of those. Never Was, Joel Osteen.
Hey, we'll do a Never Was. We'll do a Never Was with you. That would be great. That would be awesome.
Never was skinny. Never.
I have never been skinny in my entire life. Ever.
See? Mark, you're a good man. It is so fun. And what an honor, dude.
You guys are
Seriously.
great.
What an honor.
Likewise, I'm super stoked. My wife is going to be super stoked, which again makes me doubly stoked. So thanks, guys. Love you very much.
You too, man. Hope
equally.
you have a great day today.
Hey, likewise. Talk soon.
All right, buddy. So there we go. I can't listen to this and not have things I would have rather said differently. But again, just kudos to Mark. What a great guy, and how fun to be able to revisit a conversation. I think we all, like I said before, have those conversations we'd love to revisit. And so often when we're in those situations, wishing, you know, we would be a little quicker on our feet. I just think if we're going to make a mistake, let's make a mistake with, you know, like chips in a drink,
right?
and not knife in the knife fight. So, so I just want to bless you, and it was so fun. I heard Ron Mitchell. Ron, if you're out there, this is for you. Justin says hi, and told us you were tuning in, which I absolutely love. And people now are gonna. I get so many requests for shout outs. It's ridiculous. But Ron, you get a shout out. And I also hear that we have some atheists who listen, but they skip it at this part when I pray. So I love that. So here, you don't have to skip this one. All right. So here is my prayer and my blessing. Are you ready? For atheists, this is for you. Jesus, take the wheel. All right. That's all I got. Jesus, take the wheel. See, that didn't hurt. Especially if you're driving. Jesus, take the wheel. Right now, take the wheel. So, Facebook, voxoc.com, Subversive Kingdom, Twitter. We love hearing what you're thinking, and are so grateful for the opportunity to be a part of your life. So until next time.
Thanks for listening to Vox, the Mike Geary podcast. Be sure to like Mike on Facebook at facebook.com/official Mike Geary. Follow Mike on Twitter and Periscope at Mike Geary for live interaction and ongoing Q&A. Don't forget to visit subversivekingdom.com for further engagement and information about Mike.